We're going to take another look at Ferdinand Verbiest. Father Ferdinand Verbiest, 9th of October, 1623 to January 1688. The Flemish Jesuit missionary in China. And so we talked about his invention before of several things. Well, he worked on star charts. He won the WWE contest, SmackDown Astronomy contest, which had extreme penalties for losing. The reward, I guess, you got to work a job teaching a bunch of people about the stars or something. But one of the things he did when he worked on the calendar, he included, of 1674, he published the Cunha-Quantu world map, and it's one of these world maps. I only showed you half of it. I knew there was another half, and I found it. And so we're going to look at that map as well as some others.
One of the things I covered about Ferdinand Verbiest in a previous video had to do with the equipment of his astronomical laboratory and the fanciness of it. And it struck me that for something on the cutting edge of scientific advancement, which is important to the knowledge of the times and the betterment of the society, you wouldn't wait around to do anything fancy schmancy with the aesthetics of it. This will be seen with the maps that we look at, and if they are the real deal, you would wonder why spend extra time making them all fancy. It seems like it could be a presentation or a prop of some sort. And this goes for things like cannons. If it's a war implement and it has a function, the form would follow the function, and there wouldn't be that much aesthetic flair to it. I don't see the point of the flamboyance of all the little etchings and design curlicues and cursive. It's like a Hallmark card more than a cannon in some cases. And with world maps, one could say, well, these are not navigable maps. They weren't used for navigation. So then I have a question. Where are the maps that were used for navigation? Why would they be so few and far between? I've seen them. I haven't really researched them in detail, but in the research I've done, coming across a navigable map, it's pretty seldom, and of course it's a smaller area. These atlases would have them, but you don't see very much of that. It kind of makes sense. These utilitarian tool things like that would be used and used up and updated over time and become obsolete. But when they become obsolete, they would probably be stored for reference, and they had these buildings to store documents in. It always makes me laugh, these civil structures that are built even with all the fires. It doesn't even take the fire in some cases to establish that the building built to harbor or preserve documents never seems to include documents of its own construction or design. In fact, looking at the historical records of patents or inventions and designs, the rudimentary and basic form of these drawings that are associated with them, the sketches, the diagrams, are simplified to a point that it seems ridiculous. You can hardly elucidate the fineries and details of these inventions from the official patent designs or patent designs. And therefore it makes me wonder if a lot of these things are not just props, just representations or presentations of something, so that there is a record of, yes, they had maps, look, see, but were these the actual ones? The world maps are my interest at the moment, but I wonder about the other ones. We'll get to it someday in a video. But for now, we'll look at these world maps. We'll look at some of these Mappa Mundis, the maps of creation, the original maps that are the so-called T maps that show the, quote, 3 continents. The known world, of course, thought to be much smaller because of the impassability of the oceans. I said impassability. That's not impossibility. But the Atlantic, for example, was seen as the Dark Sea, and I did a previous video about that. It's really fascinating that the Atlantic is described as this foreboding sea that is churning and dark, and it seems like with the demise of Atlantis there were gas eruptions and kind of a muddy, shallow, almost swampy nature to large areas of the Atlantic Ocean. The problem with that explanation for why it took until 1492 to cross the ocean blue, well, the Pacific was even later. I look for records of anybody from the Orient crossing to the Americas in the West, and it just doesn't make sense. And in these world maps, it's pretty well known, but supposedly the information came from the Europeans over in the late 1400s to early 1500s, maybe across the Silk Road, which itself was considered impassable for various reasons, to get the information to the, quote, Far East about the neighboring continent of North America across the Pacific, which it just seems to me you didn't need to wait for some kind of new sailing or steam technology to have a ship cross that ocean. It can happen just through drifting. There have been large rafts that arrive in the Pacific Northwest, for example, from Japan, just from various tsunamis that set things adrift, or Japanese fishing boats sometimes just wash up or arrive there. Usually there's nobody on it, but it's not very difficult to see how that could have happened, and vice versa. It can happen the other way as well, but it's less likely. That the route's a little bit longer due to the currents.
So I thought about making a longer video about these maps, and I think actually there's not that much to say about it. The points that I had to make about it were the way they drew the lakes. For example, the Great Lakes, like where I live, currently they have the general location right, and they get the fact of it having a connection to the sea. Of course, a long time before these maps were made in the 1600s, late 1600s mostly, early 1700s, some of them, with this size and location, they don't really have that much accuracy with that. The location, yeah, generally, but the shape of it. And I think with the Great Lakes in this case, it does match actually very exactly the former lake bed. So what I mean by that is, I don't live right on the coast. I live between these different sandy beach edges that are inland and the actual lake. And it had a sandy shore when the lake reached out that far. And it could be, in the more recent past, that the lake was that far. They talk about the Ice Age and the glaciers, etc. So when you look at this map, if you think about where the glaciers were and where we know the Great Lakes, for example, were, it's actually quite accurate. I don't know as much about the other lakes up in Canada. I haven't been up there, but obviously, like on this one, there's the island of California, and Alaska is all kinds of messed up. But who knows what like what Alaska was before. So what I'm putting out here is I'm floating the idea that maybe it's not just some approximation. They filled in the map the best they could with what they didn't really know. And this is a Chinese map, by the way. This is from Ferdinand, this one actually for sure, from Ferdinand Verbiest, the Jesuit map maker, etc. So they went to China, then they have California, they have the island. Oh, well, they just got that wrong. Well, I've said before, what if it really was an island? There are some things that could be much more accurate than you give it credit for being if the map is older than perhaps you think, or that the landscape and geography was actually different at that time. It may have been an accurate representation. But you could say, I can see where you could say, oh, they just didn't actually know because, look, it's blank, and that proves that they didn't know. And yeah, that makes sense. But they kind of agree, the map makers, about like the North Pole. They have the 4 land masses, the 4 rivers. Sometimes they say Hyperborea. I don't know about all that stuff. But the Great Lakes, that's actually not a bad representation of where I know there are sandy shores. They call sometimes they call it the Ohio Valley, and there are like in Bowling Green, Ohio, there is Sand Ridge Road, and that was like the beach front at some former time, and I believe that it truly was. I don't think it's just made up stuff. And where I live, it's pretty sandy because this was under Lake Erie at some point. So where I live currently would be under the lake. And they tell us here that, oh, well, they had these, I don't know who's they having it, but they say, there were glaciers a mile deep in this area. A mile, 5,000 feet of ice. Oh, come on. But who knows, with the worldwide flood, if that truly happened, it looks like it did, maybe something like that would be a natural result afterwards. Who knows? No one knows. Well, maybe somebody did know when they made this map. I'm not sure how they would figure the land masses the way they did if it was the ice. I don't really believe that could be the ice because the sun is kind of consistently strong in the summer times and it would not allow ice. It's like, it was 80 degrees today. It's not even, what is it, mid-April? Oh man, I gotta finish my taxes quick. But yeah, this is it's interesting to look at. And then Antarctica, well, it is a Jesuit map maker, so the southern latitudes you can take somewhat with a grain of salt. We don't know for sure a lot about that, but it's interesting how they did that. And yeah, that's less detailed, and that makes sense, but the shape of Africa is a little different. They should have known that. Even the shape of Europe is a little bit off, I think. And they should have known that more exactly. And I don't know enough about India. I'd have to look into it to see if, like, the lakes were all the same. It's funny how it's sectioned out with the panels. The Chinese like to do that. But I think what's interesting, too, another thing, where they put the writing. Did they really have to put the writing there? Are they sure there's nothing there of note to put the notes over it? Or would the notes and the writing cover it up? Like what? I don't know. I don't read ancient, medieval, Renaissance, whatever, Chinese. And I don't know what it's saying. It's so important. It covers up, like part of Spain is covered up, or Portugal, whatever, by the writing, and they have the writings there, and then it's somewhat repaired with the patchwork. And then there are these lines. There are these lines like right where the English channel would be. Maybe there's a line there. I found that interesting. So I don't know. I guess there is a lot more to say about this than just when I go to do the video, I'm thinking, oh man, what am I really going to say about it? And there's some where. There's King Kong down there. And yeah, the map gets a little sketchy around there, but Antarctica is not that close to the tip of Africa. And they should have known that, right? Because they could easily get to the tip of Africa. I guess it was and is an area of the world that is not as easily navigable by the ships, the types of ships that they had at the time. When I was in California, I learned more about like seafaring vessels. It's quite fascinating to me, and one of the things that I learned is the barnacles that grow, and they don't grow on the ships that are in motion, but if you have a ship in port, somewhat stationary, they can grow pretty fast. And nowadays, you take them out every X number of months, or not too many years. Can't let it go too long. You got to pull it out of the water, and you got to get rid of all the barnacles, which is a tedious process because it's like removing concrete. It's like concrete on your boat, and then you repaint it. And they used to repaint them with more toxic paints with arsenic and things that would prevent the sea life from latching on and growing. And back then, I guess they had pitch and tar and stuff like that. But that's a lot of work to just, these seafaring vessels without radio communications, if they didn't have it. And as far as we know, we don't know, we suspect otherwise, but as far as we actually know, they didn't have radio communications and things like that. Although there were signs of like electrical things on boats way ahead of when you'd think they would have it. But I would be terrified to be out in the open ocean without radio communications. But alas, I pulled up some other maps. It's a lot of the same type of stuff, but it's interesting how oddly shaped the geographies can be of Antarctica. And boy, Antarctica, what a question mark, and as far as continents go, what a void, what a strange kind of everything about Antarctica is strange. If you go further back in time, you get to these maps that they call them the Mappa Mundis, these Mappa Mundi from Hereford, and these I find interesting. They call them T-maps sometimes, or creation maps, and they only supposedly knew of 3 continents, so it's like a T, it makes 3 sections, but usually on the top right section. And in all the maps from this time, one thing that strikes me is how childish they look, how utterly, the globe and the world maps, you can't really navigate by them, but they give you a general idea of where things are, and I suppose that's what this is trying to do. But again, I have to ask the question, what if it was actually like that? Well, you look into this more, and what they say about it does seem to be kind of true, that it's just depicting the smaller part of the world, which is basically the known world at the time. And they depict the Red Sea, which, wait a minute, would the Red Sea be on the edge of the known world? See where it starts to fall apart and not make sense? They say the ocean is all around, and but the Red Sea is literally red. Like, no, they just call it that. It's just called the Red Sea. It's not actually red. No, they depict it as red. Well, it's a map. They have to represent what it is. Okay, but like the ocean's green, and the lakes and inland seas are blue, and the Red Sea is red. Okay. But the fact it's so unrecognizable, well, they did the best they could by candlelight, and before they hit 35 years old, or whatever the life expectancy was for them at the time. Well, okay, we can give them that, but it's one map doesn't match the other, and it's such a tiny part of the world. And they did know about other parts of the world, but I thought this was interesting here about Noah. They show Noah on the ark with a couple animals. It's childish. There's nothing realistic about this stuff, okay? There's nothing realistic about this stuff. But they're pretty consistent about the 4 rivers. This shows 3 at the top of the world. And they already had castles all over the place. And they had the people with that. They didn't have the puffy cheeks yet. Blow in the wind. That's how the wind, children, that's where the wind comes from. Yep. You get the same crap all the way. Skip 1,000 years, nothing changes. course, because there's that 1,000-year question. You go to the 1200s, and the zonal world map, it's even worse. Or I guess maybe this one came before the others, but they don't have crap, man. They don't... World maps, that's no good. Well, maybe the world maps were... That's what I'm saying. Maybe the world maps were accurate. And so all we get today are either misrepresentations that are very childish looking and very vague and very cartoonish and basically inaccurate of what we assume would be the same. Or we get something like we looked at earlier, which is a map that is somewhat more detailed. It lacks detail in certain areas, and it's done, by the people basically in control at the time, and it's meant to, and all that. And they made it as accurate as they had to. And how accurate that was may be more accurate than we have previously, or more than others have really considered. At least, I don't know what other people have considered, but I haven't really considered it as much. You may think I have, and I have considered things like that, but I haven't considered it as much as I am at this moment. I'm really considering it. What is the accuracy? What if it was more accurate? Who knows? Maybe it was. Mayhaps it were, and mayhaps it weren't. Mayhaps it is, mayhaps it tain't. But we know, just looking around like this one from the manuscript, you look at other areas of the manuscript, and it's interesting. Again, I think they had to show the accuracy as much, just like today. They show you as accurate as things, not as they could show, but as they have to. So whatever you can verify on your own, they'll show you that much. So when you get your GPS driving map, it's pretty dang accurate, because you're going to make that drive and you're going to see. And if it's not matching up, you're going to say stuff like, that dog don't hunt. Or if they make a map about your area where you grew up, you'd say, and it is right, you'd look at that and you would see the map and how it's depicted, and you'd say, yep, that's right. That's the way I grew up. That's the way I like it. And that's the way it's gonna be. Just like that. And they depicted in this older manuscript giants. Oh, it's just from the Bible, and they're just, okay. But if people kind of knew about that, because they came across that stuff, then they kind of have to depict it somewhere, right? So they do. But does it have to be tied to the Bible? Just like all the paintings of the... Well, not all the paintings, that's too general. Let me be more precise and correct. That most of the paintings, at least more and more of the paintings, to a vast majority of the paintings, as you go back across the centuries into the 1600s and then especially the 1500s, it gets to be a religious theme throughout. It's almost all biblical depictions. Okay. But yeah, you go back and you look at this map of the world. Probably, this is really old, guys. This is about as old as you find. Map of the world, probably created at Canterbury in about 1025 Anno Domini AD. Thank you very much. And it's like the other medieval world maps. It's oriented with the east at the top, and it shows the Red Sea all over the place on the right side, generally like the other ones. Because the Red Sea, what color is water? Blue, green, close enough. Indigo, I don't know. Violet, I don't know. Blue, how about blue, green, aqua, cyan? Okay. What color is the Red Sea? But no, green, no, it's red. Magenta, no, it's not magenta. That hasn't been invented yet. It is red. You mean like red in a book or in a paper? No, it's red, the color. The sea is red? Yeah. How many red seas are there? One. Well, in this map, they're showing one, two. There's, red lakes. It's Maybe the artist bled all over that map. Maybe he had a nosebleed while he was finishing it up. No, that's meant to be that way. Well, Moses parted, quote, the Red Sea. Which one? I don't know. One of them. Got to the other side. Why did Moses... It's like, why did the chicken cross the road? To get the other side. Why did Moses part the Red Sea? To get the other side. And to wipe out his enemies in a terrible death of drowning. No, God did that. So it's not wrong. And, yeah, because of what they're going to do. All right, anyway. Here's another one. 13th century. So hundreds of years later, what's the progress here? Oh. Yeah, okay. That's not that great of a map. Red Sea, okay. And yeah, this is more like the other ones. The Red Sea's up there. I mean, it goes right off the edge of what? And I don't know. But God's up there. But it's interesting. The basically the history that I come across, it basically begins with the Norman invasion, 1066. Is things get sketchier and sketchier, but you get back to 1066, and it's so sketch, it's gone. That's what I find. 1025, I mean that. So you talk about the 1,000 years. What happened to the 1,000 years? Was this the millennial reign? You know, it's right up against it. About 1025. Because I saw this list of cultural events, significant cultural events, and it was in alphabetical order, but the first thing on the list is 1066 Norman invasion, and I know they had things on there from before that, but I'm telling you that that's basically, like, it gets to be about nothing. You go, there's a lot of history there, but it's all from a very few sources. It makes sense that it would diminish as you go back in time and with fewer people, but the extent to which that is pretty astounding. So, okay, but yeah, there's other maps that they're all different. And that's funny, because did the geography change that much? And this is from Christie's in London. I don't think it's trying to be a world map, but it does show. It's like the Orville path. Yeah, I don't know. I have to look at this one a little more. That's the star map. Oh, I'm sorry. This is interesting, because this is the star map, and this may be from Ferdinand Verbiest. Yeah, it is, I think, because it's the Chinese one. Yeah. So this was quite an interesting find that I did from Christie's. Christie's. They have one in China. Christie's. So, you have a Christie's in China. Yes, they do. And they have the star map there, the constellations. And so what they're showing there, the river is the river in the sky, and that's referring to the galaxy, the Milky Way. And this is a very sophisticated. I have to hand it. I've been making fun of Ferdinand Verbiest, but I have to hand it to them. This being pretty dang sophisticated, boy. I'm impressed, and that tain't easy. Yeah, well, they credit this one, Xing, to manuscript star map after Ferdinand Verbiest, 1712. So this is kind of maybe one of his students, he was the master, but this was the learner. But they did a good job. And, well, it's interesting. And I'm really glad to be doing this research. I hope you support the channel so I can continue to do that. Because the stuff that we find, that we have found, the information changes, because I have to sort through a lot more AI-generated and bot-generated bullshit. It's just getting thick. It takes up all kinds of search results and things, and you have to dig to get to the good sources, which I do. And yeah, it's not going to get any easier, but it does get easier for me the more I do it, because I get methods and I have I learned ways and tricks to do things that nobody else does. And if you value that, be sure to support the channel in the links below. So yeah, there's more of these Chinese maps, and no surprise, it's China-centered, and they don't know shite about anything really that far from China, but really they should have, because people got around all over the place, like the Dutch. Tiny little country rules the world, basically, gets everywhere. How does it happen? I don't know. The celestial sphere, they have that, and this is the kind of thing that makes me wonder. I've looked at these over the years many times. They did not have a little blue ball on the inside with all the continents normally, but this one was interesting because they had the zodiacal constellations depicted with somewhat modern science. So it makes me think, like, where did this come from? Because is this really a really old Chinese manuscript? Did the Chinese do it that much differently? And I'm thinking of doing a Chinese accent to be funny, but I won't. So score 1 for the naysayers. No, screw them. I will try it. So here, this is what I thought of doing. You've heard me say this. It's the way I grew up. That's the way I like it. And that's the way it's gone be. So when you look at a Chinese depiction of the celestial sphere, it's not the orrery, there's a special name for it, but anyway, they would say, that's the way, I just went German, that's the way I like it, that's the way I grew up, that's the way I like it, and that's the way it's gone be. It's terrible. Oh man, I shouldn't publish this, but I will. It is so bad it's funny. Man, I can do a lot of voices and things, so I haven't heard Chinese in a long time. That's the way I like it. All right, got it wrong. That's the way I like it. That's the way I grew up. No, it's so different. That's the way I grew up. That's the way I like. That's the way I like it. And that's the way it's going to be. Sorry. Oh man, I just lost my Chinese audience, or I gained them if they're cool. Okay. All right, that is a terrible way to end a video, but that's just how it's going to end. This is how it ends here, just like that. Oh wait, there's more. But wait, there's more. Let's just have a quick look at the rest. European map of the world before 1492. Before the ocean sailed Columbus blue. Oh, it went that way, huh? Yeah, that really sucks. But there's Antarctica down there that kind of knew about that shit. But, oh, yeah, I'm glad I remember to talk about this. On Antarctica, they depict this. You see what I'm seeing there? It's like lightning coming down over mountains or something. I am going to look into that because when I was looking at these videos of Antarctica, they had this vivid image of a bus at, I think it was at the Amundsen Scott Station, South Pole Station, and they depicted this thing on the wall in blue and silver painted somewhere. Maybe it wasn't on the bus, I think it was in a building. And it was basically the same thing or close to it. What is that? What is that about? What does it have to do with Antarctica? And how did they know about it that long ago? They shouldn't have. Oh, well, the people in Antarctica today just knew about this map. And they copied this thing. It says, it's like the Nile or something, like Falls Nile in Ohio orbit. I can't read it. Whatever it's saying there. It's not Ohio. But we'll figure it out because I'm too tired right now to research it. But what I'm doing is kind of cheating a little bit this time. But just presenting it to you, and hopefully in the comments, somebody who actually knows this stuff can get us started in the right direction. Not the way the mainstream narrative does. That's boring. We don't want to hear that because anybody can look that stuff up. I want to know the truth. That's why, yeah, I don't read the sidebars that much, and yeah. And I'm getting better at just, I've absorbed it anyway, and so then people who do tell me, I'm usually not surprised about the mainstream stuff. I want to know what... It's like people say, I don't know, I don't want to know what the conspiracy is, I want to know what the facts are. Well, I don't want to know what the mainstream stuff is, I want to know what the facts are. I want to know what the conspiracy is so I know where to start to think about it. Because also, I don't think that's right. Whatever the conspiracy is, if it's just like, then we've got to start this mainstream conspiracy, because there are mainstream conspiracies, but this is how it's going to end. This is how it ends here. Just like that.